a former White House official, and also in Doha, Shafiq Ghabra, Professor of Political Science at Kuwait University. Welcome to all of my guests. Shafiq Ghabra in our Doha studio. To make those sorts of accusations in a major American newspaper can backfire, can't it? How do you assess the way the Qatari ambassador has phrased his comments about the UAE and their connection to the September the 11th attacks?
That's very complicated. To my understanding, definitely Qatar will have to do a lot to explain and to defend itself. But to state that there was any formal Arab participation in September 11 will be an overreach, from my opinion. To my knowledge, from what I've seen, no one in the Arab system can be seriously involved in this. This was a Qaeda operation, and it wanted to affect the US and to damage its relations with a group of regimes. On top of them is Saudi Arabia, and that's how I read September 11.
Shafiq Ghabra in Doha, you're nodding in agreement. Of course, you have a general sense of how Gulf Arab and Arab nations are reacting to this. Some have stayed silent, they are watching. What's your general sense of the situation so far when it comes to the political dynamics of the region?
Well, first, let me assert that I do understand that Qatar has to push back. At the same time, we have to push back. Everybody has to push back, but within the objectivity possible in a context that is problematic altogether. Definitely, Qatar is not involved in terrorism, and the attack on it in Washington should be fully defended. But at the same time, I do see that September 11 had to do more with the Qaeda and the grassroots terrorist group that has a history in its relation to the US, and how that all came to express itself in the way it did.
Indeed.
Now, to explain the region, if that question still stands,
yes,
or if there is time for it, I will. It's a very complicated dynamic, as we see. Qatar is suffering from a blockade, a state of sanction, a state of boycott. But I see that the first days were really the shock. And I think that Qatar was able to absorb that shock. It is much more stable, as I see it today, in terms of dealing with this and ability to find new strategic routes for commerce, for food, dealing with Iran, dealing with Iraq, dealing with Turkey, bringing a Turkish base, realigning its relationship again with the US, confirming the base, joint exercises. So Qatar has absorbed it. It's doing a calm and solid job in defending its strategic position vis-a-vis this kind of boycott that was very sudden and unexpected.
Ghabra in Doha, let's come back to you, because the Qataris have been on a major charm offensive. We've seen the foreign minister travelling to European capitals in a very short space of time. We're also hearing in the last 24 hours the Emir of Qatar has sent a handwritten letter to Vladimir Putin in Russia explaining the situation so far. They certainly are able, it seems, the Qataris, to get their message across. One wonders again how the UAE and Saudi are going to counter this.
It's going to be hard to counter for a simple reason, because you have a situation where there is a boycott, sanctions, and siege. And you have a situation where there is a much bigger country, a group of countries, much bigger, boycotting, sanctioning a very small country in size, cutting it totally inland. So this country is resisting through peaceful means and seeking to establish its independence, its ability to set its own agenda and policy within reason. And I think the world will sympathize with this, particularly that these sanctions and boycott and siege is not internationally sanctioned. It doesn't come from the UN. It doesn't come from anybody on the world level. It's very localized.
In going forward, let's go back to Shafiq Ghabra, because in going forward, there is still all of this discussion about mediation. And one wonders now what the position of Kuwait is, or the US, because while Qatar is on this charm offensive and getting its point across, who takes that lead in the mediation to try and solve this, Kuwait or the US? How are you reading the situation?
So yes, I mean, while Qatar is trying to talk, there is a lot of diplomacy going on, and Kuwait is definitely, from the first day or two, part of this diplomacy. What this diplomacy does, from the Kuwaiti perspective, as well as all other perspectives, it kind of keep the situation as calm as possible, keeps the emotions within a certain reasonable dosage. It can help over time solve the issue, but we don't know how. And therefore the diplomacy continues, which is positive. As long as people are talking, it's positive. But at the same time, some of those sanctions, some of those policies of siege will fall out of their own weight, or out of their own lack of legitimacy, as well as clear thinking on how they were conducted and what they are exactly intended to do. And as explained, everything done with Qatar produced the other result, produced the ultimate negative result from the point of view of those who created that siege. Qatar is more independent today, more diversified on the security level and on other levels.
Okay.
But the Kuwaiti approach to mediating comes out of Kuwait's own experience.
Sure.
When conflicts at that level take place, they do leave damage for everybody, and there is this attempt to get over.